Well, this week, Governor Josh Green vetoed more than $1 billion in state spending that was approved by lawmakers. I spoke to our Daryl Huff about reaction to the move.
The shock was the amount that he cut, $1 billion. Now, half of that wasn't really a cut. It was kind of a shift. So instead of having $2 billion in the rainy day fund, he took $500 million of that, $500 million, and put it into what's called the carryover, which we would call a surplus. And that's so he could get to it easier. So that's $500 million of the billion. The other $500 million was a whole long list of actual things the legislature wanted to fund, but now will not get funded. For example, a big first responder campus for emergency agencies to work together in Mililani Tech Park. That thing, not only did it not get the $72 million that was allocated, it's done. Even the senator who was advocating for it, Donovan Delacruz, agrees he doesn't think that's ever going to get funded. So they have to look for other ways to help out the first responders, particularly HIEMA, the State of Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, because it was so controversial and it was so much money. It was an easy target for the governor. The governor was nice enough to talk to Senator Delacruz about it, so it didn't cause a big flap. But that was a big one. Another one was big irrigation project, also in that district. There were also a number of other smaller cuts made all across the different agencies in order to balance it.
But whenever you have that many of cuts, would you expect some people to be upset that the funding was moved somewhere else?
I actually think the feedback I've been getting is that people were kind of relieved. Because if you remember, at the end of the legislature, there was a rare sort of revolt by Democratic lawmakers in the state house where they were saying there's dramatic cuts to the education budget. There's dramatic cuts to UH. Meanwhile, we're funding this first responder campus and we're funding other things that they don't think are important, but that we'd lost our focus on the key priorities that we need to focus on. That was a complaint of a number of dissident members of the state house, and it seems like the governor really heard what they were saying. Mm-hmm. So he's going to actually put more money into education, more money to DOE, to UH, money to the stadium, money to HTA, all to make sure those priorities get done while basically scraping off a lot of other stuff that was there.
Mm-hmm. So it sounded like he essentially triaged everything, which what he can do.
Yeah,
coming from the medical field.
He has the power to actually withhold money. So he could have just gone, I'll sign the budget, but then not spent the money. But then that reallocation process wouldn't have been so straightforward. It wouldn't have been transparent. So you got to give him credit for doing it out in the open. But I got the impression from most legislators that they were perfectly fine with what they did. There was too much controversy. He kind of did away with the controversy, refocused on priorities, and I have not heard a lot of complaints about it.
Okay, well, that's good news. So where does it go from here? What are the deadlines we're looking at? It's supposed to take effect July 1st.
The budget will take effect July 1. There aren't any other deadlines unless the legislators decide to override any of those vetoes, and I really don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, and just real quickly, the vetoing of bills, there's a different deadline.
There's a difference. So this was dealing with a budget that takes effect July 1. There was $300 million lost because the Council of Revenues decided that we are not going to have as much money coming in. So that was what the governor says triggered it. I think the trigger was also this unhappiness with an awful lot of stuff in the budget. So he had a good reason, but it also was a face-saving reason for him to do all these rearrangements. The next stage is when they look at the bills, which they've been looking at to see if there's flaws in them or policy disputes that would lead the governor to veto them. That's the next big deadline. He has to inform the legislature, I think 10 days out from the actual veto deadline, which is the 11th of July. So we may still see bills vetoed, and that's the usual thing you hear where they need 2/3 of the legislature to override. And again, I really don't expect to see overridden bills unless the governor finds a flaw that needs to be fixed, in which case he might veto it. Then they would negotiate and come back for a very short session to reissue those bills.
And thanks again to Daryl Huff for that update.